Athalia Lindsley was not someone who kept her head down. She was born in Toledo, Ohio in 1917, partly raised on the Isle of Pines in Cuba, and spent 2 decades in New York as a model, a Broadway chorus dancer, and a television hostess on Bud Collier's game show, Winner Takes All. She once dated Joseph P. Kennedy Jr., JFK's older brother, and there were even rumors of an engagement before his death in World War II. So not exactly a shrinking violet. By the early 1970s, she had settled in St. Augustine, Florida's oldest city, and thrown herself into local politics. She ran for the Florida legislature in 1970 and was planning a run for the county commission. And on September 10, 1973, she married James Jinx Lindsley, a former 2-term mayor of St. Augustine. Despite being married, they lived in separate houses. She was at 124 Marine Street on the Matanzas River. He was at his place on St. George Street. Things were not going well between them. In letters to her sister, Athalia described Jinx as a complete leech, a complete liar. She had changed the locks on her house. But the relationship that would come to define everything wasn't with her husband. It was with the man next door. The neighbor. Alan Griffin Stanford Jr. lived right next to Athalia at 126 Marine Street. He was the county manager and county engineer of St. Johns County. In other words, a powerful man in a small town. Things started petty between them. Athalia's rescue dogs barked too much. Stanford complained, but it escalated fast. Athalia started challenging Stanford's professional qualifications, claiming he didn't have the required certification to legally hold his job. She showed up at county commission meetings 4 or 5 times to make her case. She filed a formal complaint with the state. At one county meeting in October 1973, she stood up and said on the record, "My life has been threatened. You mention personal things. He threatened my life." Stanford had reportedly told her to her face, "You're a vicious and evil woman, and one day I'm going to fix you." On January 23, 1974, state investigators had shown up at Stanford's office as part of her formal complaint. His career was genuinely on the line. The murder. That same afternoon, the same day investigators had been at Stanford's office, Athalia and Jinx had been out shopping in Jacksonville. Jinx dropped her at her Marine Street home at around 5:30 p.m. and headed back to his own place. Somewhere between 5:45 and 6:10 p.m., Athalia stepped out onto her front porch to walk her pet blue jay. Yes, a blue jay named Clementine. 18-year-old Locke McCormick, who lived 2 doors down, heard screaming. He looked out the window and saw a man on Athalia's porch, raising and lowering his arms in striking motions. McCormick ran inside and told his grandmother, "Mr. Stanford is hitting Mrs. Poncell." Police were called at 6:12 p.m. They found Athalia on her porch. Medical examiner Dr. Arthur Schwartz determined she'd been struck 9 times with a machete. Her hand, her arm, her head. 1 finger was severed. She was very nearly decapitated. Police Chief Virgil Stewart put it plainly. She was dead when we got there. She had been badly butchered. A blood trail ran from her front steps, across the driveway, to the concrete wall separating her property from Stanford's. Inside, her groceries sat upright on the kitchen floor, totally undisturbed. Her keys were still in the back door lock. Clementine's cage had been smashed. The bird was never found. At around 7 p.m., Stanford pulled into his driveway. When police told him his neighbor was dead, he had one question. Was it the evidence? 3 weeks after the murder, on February 17, 1974, county mechanic Dewey Lee searched some marshland about a mile from the crime scene near a city dump. What he found was remarkable. A machete, a bloodied white dress shirt, dark blue trousers, a belt, a purple tie, a wristwatch, and shoes. All of it wrapped up in a pink towel. Everything tied back to Stanford. The wristwatch serial number was traced to him, confirmed by his own jeweler. The shirt and trousers had been purchased by Stanford's wife, Patricia Stanford, the previous June. His laundry mark was on the shirt. Blonde hair was found on both the machete and the trousers. Blood was found inside his county vehicle. And county records showed he had borrowed a machete from work and never returned it. On February 22, 1974, Stanford was arrested and charged with murder. His statement, "I am totally innocent of this thing and will put a lot of trust in the Lord." He was released on $20,000 bond, where it started to fall apart. Here's where things get frustrating. The investigation had serious problems from the start. At the crime scene, a police officer ordered ambulance attendants to hose down the blood. Right there on the porch. Critical evidence gone. Officers walked through the scene and left their own footprints. The clothing from the marsh had been sitting in salt water and mud too long for proper blood type analysis. And by the time DNA testing came along decades later, the weapon, the watch, the clothes, the hair, all of it had either been cleared out of evidence storage or degraded beyond any use. Just gone. Francis Bemis. Before the trial even started, something happened that made the whole case feel even darker. Francis Bemis was 76 years old. A retired newspaper writer, public relations specialist, World War II veteran, and close friend and neighbor of Athalia's. After the murder, she became fixated on the case. She told people she knew something. She was reportedly putting together a book about Athalia's death. She was expected to testify at Stanford's trial. She told the St. Augustine Record, "I think St. Augustine is the safest place I have ever lived. I go out walking at night and will continue to do so." On November 1st, 1974, while Stanford was out on bail 2 months before his trial, Bemis went for her evening walk and never came home. Her body was found the next morning in a vacant lot about a block and a half from her house. Her skull had been crushed with a cement block. Her clothes had been torn off, though no sexual assault was found. There were signs her body had been partially burned. No one was ever arrested. Police Chief Stewart told reporters, "The trail is cold. I doubt we'll ever catch the killer." The trial. Stanford's trial opened on January 22, 1975. The prosecution was led by Assistant State Attorney Richard O. Watson. The defense attorney was Edward Booth, and he was good. Booth attacked on 2 fronts. First, the physical evidence was planted. He argued that county mechanic Dewey Lee had staged the whole thing in the marsh, possibly in coordination with Sheriff Dudley Garrett or even Jinx Lindsley. He told the jury, "Isn't it strange that all the deputies and trained police officers didn't know what to look for or where to look for it?" And without stopping, Lee went right to the spot, walked up to the bank, and there it was. "I submit to you that Dewey Lee put it out there that morning." Second, the eyewitness, McCormick, the teenager who had shouted Stanford's name to his grandmother, wavered under cross-examination. He now said the attacker was heavier with more hair than Stanford, who weighed around 150 pounds. He'd never seen the man's face. His identification was based on clothing and direction of movement. 5 county employees backed up Stanford's alibi, saying he was at his office between 6 and 7 p.m. Booth painted Athalia as erratic and volatile and suggested anyone could have done it. And then there was the money. The community of St. Augustine raised $250,000 for Stanford's defense. That's a lot of faith, or a lot of something, in a small Florida town in 1975. On February 3, 1975, after 2.5 hours of deliberation, time enough to elect a foreman and eat dinner, the jury came back not guilty. Law enforcement did not take it well. Sheriff Garrett: "Yes, I think he did it. I signed a complaint against him, and I don't concur with the verdict. If I'd been on the jury, I think I could have filled it in from the evidence and testimony." Prosecutor Watson said he was amazed the jury could go through all that evidence in 2.5 hours. Retired Sergeant Dominic Niccolo was the most direct. Jinx Lindsley was eliminated as a suspect immediately. He was somewhere else. "We know Alan did it. We had the right guy." Stanford left St. Augustine after the acquittal and never came back. He died in 2006. Both murders remain officially unsolved. The theories. Theory 1. Jinx Lindsley did it. There's a version of this story where the husband did it. Athalia had called Jinx a leech and a liar in writing. She changed her locks. They were heading for a separation. Jinx owned a machete, kept it in his car actually. He had a reported history of being volatile with former wives, and when he was shown the murder weapon at trial, his response was, "All machetes look alike to me." There was also a 15 to 25-minute gap in his alibi that evening. BuzzFeed Unsolved covered this angle, and it gets some traction online, but it doesn't really hold up. The officers who worked the case eliminated Jinx almost immediately. Sergeant Niccolo was flat out certain he was elsewhere, and crucially, none of the physical evidence points to Jinx. Not the watch, not the laundry-marked clothing, not the borrowed machete. Nothing connects him to the scene. Theory 2. The evidence was planted. This is the theory that actually worked in court. The argument goes that Dewey Lee planted the clothing and the machete in the marsh, maybe on his own, maybe with the help of Sheriff Garrett or Jinx Lindsley, to frame Stanford for a murder he didn't commit. The detail that makes it stick, at least enough for reasonable doubt, is the precision of Lee's search. No trained officer had found anything in 3 weeks. Lee walks out to the marshes, goes straight to one spot, and there it all is, wrapped in a pink towel. That is a strange thing. But here's the problem. What's the motive? Dewey Lee was a county mechanic. He had no obvious reason to frame Stanford, no personal stake in the case, and no one has ever produced any evidence of coordination between him and anyone else. And this theory can't explain the blood trail to Stanford's property, the blood in his vehicle, or the eyewitness who named him before anyone else even arrived on scene, all of which would have had to be planted before police got there. Theory 3. A stranger did it. The defense floated this too, that a random transient, some unknown figure, happened to hack Athalia to death on her porch that evening. 9 blows. Nothing stolen. In broad daylight. On a street where her neighbor watched it happen. This isn't really a theory. It was a courtroom strategy. There's no evidence for it whatsoever, and the nature of the attack, that specific, that violent, that personal, is about as far from a random killing as you can get. Alan Stanford killed Athalia Lindsley. Not the most dramatic conclusion, I know. He was acquitted. He died a free man. There will never be a conviction. But if you apply Occam's razor, the explanation that requires the fewest assumptions, Stanford is the only answer that actually fits. Think about what's not in dispute. He made a death threat against her, on the record, at a public meeting. On the day she was killed, state investigators had just shown up at his office because of her complaint. His job, his career, Everything he had in that town was on the line. The teenager who witnessed the attack didn't just say he was a man. He said he was Stanford, by name, to his grandmother, in the moment. Years later, a web sleuths user who knew McCormick personally said he had told them in private that it was Stanford he watched that evening, that he never actually changed his mind. He just crumbled under a skilled cross-examination. The blood trail led from Athalia's porch straight to the wall of his property. His watch was found at the scene, serial number confirmed by his own jeweler. His clothing with his laundry mark confirmed purchased by his wife, and a machete matching the one he had borrowed from the county and never returned. As we've seen, Jinx Lindsley was eliminated by the people who actually investigated this. No physical evidence, no credible opportunity. And as we've also seen, the planted evidence theory needs a conspiracy that has no motive at its center and still can't explain the blood trail or the blood in Stanford's car. The motive was survival, professional, personal, everything. The means was a machete he already had in his possession. The opportunity was a roughly 25-minute window between Jinx dropping Athalia off and Stanford arriving home. Time enough to do it, change, and get rid of the evidence in marshland he knew. And when police told him his neighbor was dead, his first instinct was to ask if it was a self-inflicted death. That question has bothered people for 50 years. It's the kind of thing you ask when you already know it wasn't an accident, but you haven't yet figured out what story to tell. The Bemis murder fits the same picture. She knew something. She was saying so out loud. She was going to go on that witness stand. Someone who desperately needed that trial to go away made sure she couldn't. That's speculation, but it's the speculation that requires the least imagination. What this case really comes down to isn't just one man. It's a small southern city in 1974 where the establishment looked after its own. A community that raised $250,000 for a defense fund. A jury that spent 2.5 hours, including dinner, on a case that took nearly a year to build. The sheriff knew. The prosecutor knew. The sergeant knew. And somehow, none of it was enough. Stanford left town after the acquittal and never came back. He died in 2006. Athalia's case is still open. It will never be closed. But that's just our read on it, and we know some of you will disagree. So tell us, who do you think killed Athalia? Do you think the evidence really was planted? Is there something about Jinx that we're all too quick to dismiss? Drop your theory in the comments. We read them all. And while you're down there, let us know where in the world you're watching from. See you in the next one. Do you want to bring bad things with you wherever you go? Our episodes are now available as a podcast. Look us up on your favorite podcast app and listen to the most truth-seeking true crime podcast out there.